Mark Kessler. I teach business classes and entrepreneurial classes here at Parkland College, and welcome to the first edition of PIN, which is Parkland's Entrepreneurial Network. And what we do is we host a couple of these events each semester, and we just invite some of our local successful business owners and entrepreneurs that can share their story. Chris is videotaping this, so a lot of this will go to the classes that I teach as part of our lesson plan and those types of things. And today we are fortunate to have Matt Cho from Urbana, local guy, and he is the founder of CoLab and Cafeteria and Company. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start out, who is Matt Cho? Tell us a little bit about your background, possibly your education, and then maybe some people that motivated you or gave you the inspiration of what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I guess I did grow up here. So I'm a townie. I left right after high school to go to college out in Baltimore, and I ended up staying out there for about 10 years before coming back. And I can get more into detail on my slides, but I guess people that have influenced me, I don't know, there's always like these people at work that we always chat with or have lunch with, and you know, you I don't know what to really call them, but these are the guys that you talk and like, man, I wish we could do this, or I have this idea, or what do you think? And I think it's that exercise of like doing that with a bunch of people and building kind of relationships that way. Are part of, I think, the process, or the early process of how I started, or how I started this skill of coming up with ideas and vetting them and seeing if they were worth pursuing and things like that. So
excellent. Well, one of the first questions I would have is, being the founder of CoLab and Cafeteria and Company, tell us a little bit about what is this, what's involved, and how you got this startup and those types of things.
So CoLab and Cafeteria Company are basically, I guess you'd call them shared spaces. There's the shared economy that's happening throughout the world, I think, and so real estate is no different, especially with spaces that you have to rent. I think there's like a kind of like economic need for shared spaces. And also, I think there's also like this collective identity. I think more is better. So, if you have a standalone pizza restaurant, you're kind of just, there by yourself. But if there's a coffee shop and a pizza restaurant, which is what Cafeteria and Company has, is basically a shared tenancy between a coffee shop and a pizza restaurant. You kind of, get the benefits of that customer base, and then it's more of a unique shared, shared economy, or an example of a shared economy within a real estate construct.
Okay, and the location?
Location, all my projects are in downtown Urbana, which is, I think, a good thing. I know there's a lot of growth in Champaign and in campus, but I think Urbana is one of those undervalued areas where I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Okay, excellent. What would be the difference, and let you explain, from like a food court in a shopping mall versus what you are presenting?
I think with kind of this suburbanization that's happened, like you have a lot of food courts in shopping malls, and over a long period of time, you've seen kind of these downtown urban areas, go backwards a little bit and have a lot of vacant spaces. I think there's kind of an interest to go back into downtown spaces and to reuse those existing buildings for newer ideas. I mean, some of these downtowns are filled with antique stores. I'm not very interested in that. But I wouldn't say food courts necessarily like the one at the mall versus something that we're developing currently this year. I don't think there's much difference other than the fact that who the tenants are.
Okay.
The mall has Taco Bell, some other franchises. I think with some more urbanized food courts, especially with lower rents compared to maybe the mall, you can get maybe a mom and pop or even a young entrepreneur that's thinking about starting their own restaurant, and those are kind of things that make me excited, is that when I see a lot of people trying to start their own business and they're really going at it.
Okay, excellent. Now, if I'm correct, you took over or purchased the Busey Center
Yep.
In Urbana.
Mhm.
Okay, you maybe share a little bit about how that even got started, or why that particular location. And I'm probably going back to your love of Urbana and where you grew up.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how did the Busey Center and that work out for
Yeah,
you?
I guess it's kind of a love-hate with Urbana. Growing up here, you're kind of stuck in the small town, and you're like, I need to get out. But coming back after being in different cities, I think you realize that Urbana has a lot of ingredients that I think are just not being connected as efficiently anymore.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I come in with the company that I started when I came back here. Yeah, I think if any of you are interested in real estate development, I think one big tip is that a lot of the projects or a lot of the properties that are available for development aren't necessarily found through traditional means, like through a broker or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what happened, is that I approached the city saying that I was interested in doing something downtown, and they were able to connect me, without using a broker, to people that were interested in selling their properties. And I think just that introduction and being able to take off from there and see which ones were, good values or
Mm-hmm.
things that I could do something with is kind of where you, I guess that's up to you.
Great. Well, that's a pretty good sized building.
Yeah,
A lot of space there.
I think
Yeah.
a little bit is also you get lucky too. I think I won't deny that. It was really lucky to get that size of building. I really wasn't in the market for something of that scale, but studying architecture, you kind of are always given less space to do things in, and in this case, it was the opposite. I was given probably 3 times the square footage that I didn't know even what to do with. So, a lot of those things, when the first question of like sitting with people and like vetting ideas and coming up with them and getting really good at that, I think that's the skill that you build. And once you're given the opportunity like this, it's just like, man, what can we fill this space with?
Great, excellent. Well, you mentioned the love of Urbana, or love-hate, whatever, but you actually started the Urbana Love website, something like that you had. What was that about? That was when you first came back then to Urbana?
Well, it took maybe a couple years before we actually started it, but it wasn't started by myself. It was actually started by some local entities like MTD, Urbana Business Association, and even some of the people from the city of Urbana. But we saw that kind of going on, and it took like a back seat. No one was really doing anything on these on Facebook even, and so we asked for permission to access it or become admins of that. And it's just a really lean way of promoting what's happening in downtown. And I think that's kind of the way one of the companies that we founded was influenced by this new way to market to people. Everybody's on social media. Everyone's being hit from every single angle, whether it's on your phone or on YouTube or whatever. So I think that's something that any business, I think, needs help with. So, but I can get into that.
Okay.
Also.
Okay. Now we're about halfway through this, so you do have some things that you want to share then on your for a PowerPoint or something that kind of shows a little bit more about the businesses that you're starting, creating.
Oh yeah.
You want to do that right now and just kind of go through with that?
Sure, I can do that and then open it up.
Yeah,
for
and I do
questions.
have a few more things,
Okay.
but I thought this might be a good time to do that. So
Okay.
I'll let you go ahead and I'll take a seat and watch.
All right. And I guess thanks for coming out and spending the afternoon to hear kind of what I've been up to. I hope some of the things that I touch on today are somewhat relevant. I just started maybe like 4 years ago, so I consider myself fresh. I'm not done. I see hopefully a long pathway ahead of me. But I think whatever stage you're in, whether you're starting or thinking about starting something or not even remotely interested in starting anything, hopefully something is of value for what I have to say today. And really, I think the outline is simple. Part 1, I just want to give a brief introduction of like how I started, because I think that's important. But then also, I think why I keep starting. I think that's the other thing, is that working with a lot of startups or people that are kind of pursuing their own businesses, there is this like hump of where you're like, did I make the right decision? But anyways, I think getting over that hump and being committed to continually starting is something that I've been learning within the last 2 or 3 years. So with that, I think the good news is that I don't think really there's like a perfect time or a perfect location. I think you can start anywhere. And I don't think there's like really a perfect formula that I followed that got me to where I'm at today. And like some of you, I think I took a couple classes in school about entrepreneurship. But really, after graduating college, I think, you know, I was like most of my graduating class. I just wanted to work, get a job with a big firm, and you know, buy furniture that wasn't from IKEA or something like that. So, and that's, you know, kind of what happened. I was lucky to get a job at Booz Allen Hamilton. Not sure if anyone knows that company, but it was made famous by this guy. And I was working for as a consultant for the federal government. And I worked there for about 10 years before actually starting my first company. But I think a lot of things happened during those 10 years that kind of primed the pump for me to start. And you know, some of those things was just conversations at lunch of just talking about ideas and being frustrated. I think those were things that you'll see are kind of themes of just being frustrated. And so, you know, what really happened? And I think the best way to describe those 10 years is that it was a period where I was forced to make many decisions, right? And I think that's, you know, when you're forced to make decisions, something happens. I think you do this thing where everyone says, like, you need to learn by doing. I think mentors say, like, oh, you need to build experience or think independently. It's all these, like, weird things that they recommend that you do. But I think a lot of it has to do with just, like, making a decision. And some of the examples that I have is, you know, living in DC, it was expensive. And again, out of frustration of paying money to rent, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try to see if I can buy my own apartment. Oops. And I guess using some of the limited classes that I took in college, like econ, I think, you know, I understood relatively what a mortgage was and maybe what the real estate market did. But really, it was the time that I spent, and it was time like after work or on weekends, you know, learning by doing. And it was going out, seeing tons of apartments in all kinds of locations. It was building spreadsheets even to find out what is income, what is an expense, you know. And then it was meeting with the people that would actually finance it, so bankers, you know, understanding what their needs were. And going through that process, it was really, I wouldn't say easy to buy the first apartment, but I think buying the first one, you get over that hump, and so it makes buying the second one a little bit easier, the third one a little bit easier, and then the fourth one. And what I was doing is I was buying these apartments back in the college town that I went to school at, and I was renting them out to friends and then kind of learning by doing that way of how do you turn over property, how do you lease property, and things like that. So this is the first apartment that I bought in DC and still have it to this day. I guess another example that I have is that I think I was really fortunate to get a job, but the job that I had was really high on work-life balance, and they offered these things called like 30-day leave without pays. And usually, like if you're pregnant or you are a new parent, you take those leaves, but no one was really taking advantage of this. And so again, I think I was a little bit frustrated about being in a career where I didn't really see myself, you know, building a career for like the next 20 years in this place. So I took advantage of those leaves and decided to take classes in different cities. And I spent one summer in New York and one in LA, and during those times I think it was basically a way of learning how to develop my own interests and trust my own instincts. So in New York I took interior architecture at Parsons, which was kind of driven by these apartments that I was looking at and buying and just wondering like how was it designed this way, and you know, if I could have some insight into interior architecture, maybe I could make those spaces more rentable or more, you know, livable. I kind of refined that, so the next summer I went to Los Angeles and I took basically this boot camp architecture course. It's what they require all master students that are going into the architecture program to take. And I hadn't applied there at that time, But I was figuring if I can go through this boot camp program and survive it, and actually think that this was interesting, that maybe I should consider going back to school. And so it was this process of building that confidence, you know, to help eventually make the decision to come back here and study architecture, and eventually leave the job that I had in DC. And I think another thing that I learned from that process was that, you know, when I was pursuing my master's in architecture here, I actually knew what classes that I wanted to take. I think in college I was just taking required courses, meeting elective requirements, and all these other things. And you know, like I don't think I can remember much of the classes that I took in undergrad, but thinking about the architecture education that I planned out for myself, it was very thought out. It was very, you know, you're taking the classes that you knew you were building skills to eventually, you know, that you can lean on in the future. And so I describe my time back in Illinois as a buffet. You know, there's like a lot of good things that I could have taken. There's also a lot of bad things at the buffet, and I didn't get, you know, caught up in the elective and just meeting requirements. And one of those things that just gets, you build this wealth of knowledge. And so, you know, like a lot of people are sometimes interested in like, what did I study and how did I move from like architecture to urban planning to civil engineering? But in reality, I was just constructing this breadth of knowledge so that I could do some of the stuff that I'm doing today. So anyways, I guess the other third example of a key decision that I made, and this one's not driven out of frustration, but out of fear. So I grew up here, and I never left the state of Illinois, let alone the country. And I think it was a mentor in architecture that basically said, if you want to be a good designer, you have to travel. Like, you have to find out how people use space and how different cultures appreciate space. And you know, observing how different people and cultures design and organize space was a lot of fun, but I think it is really rewarding to actually be present in these spaces and understand, you know, different times of day or environments that you're in. And I never thought that I would ever work in a foreign country ever, but I was lucky to get a job in Tokyo for an internship, and I took it. Probably the worst pay possible, but also very rewarding experience from a design perspective. In any case, I think the long story short of this decision making and learning by doing process is that I think whatever stage you're in, and you know, whatever period of like frustration you're in, I think you just have to embrace those moments of like frustration or fear. And enjoy the buffet, I guess. I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, and you can basically pick and choose and curate your own experience. And I can say, you know, looking back now, I don't think it made a lot of sense of what I was doing back then. It didn't make any sense to my parents, of course, but looking back now, I kind of like, oh, that's why I had this instinct and why I did something. So yeah, again, trust your gut, enjoy the process. In any case, so what is it I don't even know, what do I actually do, right? What got me to this point? And when I came out to study architecture, it was during my second year when I started the development company that I own today, which is called Cake Design Development. And instead of an architecture practice, I set it up as a real estate development company. And basically, real estate development, for people who aren't familiar with that, is developers take existing property and try to take it to a higher and better use. And usually what that means is increasing the income generated from it, which in turn makes it more valuable. So, you know, a lot of stuff that you're seeing on Green Street, downtown Champaign, that is real estate development in play right in our backyard. I think the other interesting point is that I started in 2009, and if anyone can remember 2009, the economy was in a pretty deep recession at a time, mostly started by real estate. It essentially popped. I don't know if anyone's seen The Big Short, but a very insightful movie on kind of what happened to the real estate market during that time that caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. But I guess for me, I started a business in probably the worst time, probably in the worst industry with 0 projects, and yeah, no one was interested in even like buying real estate, let alone developing real estate. So again, what was I doing? Back to my frustration. So I get frustrated a lot. As I was an architecture student, I realized, you know, what I was getting trained to do was not really architecture anymore. I was basically replugging myself back into the 9-to-5 workforce, and getting much less pay. And it was something that I was getting frustrated with. The other thing too is like when I had more of an interest in development, a lot of developers were developing projects like these, which, you know, nothing against these kind of projects, but I mean, these were things that I wasn't really interested in developing. But I guess fast forward a little bit, I did come across an opportunity in 2013 with BC Bank. I did acquire these 2 buildings from them, and then shorter thereafter, I bought the building adjacent to it from the architect that I was working with at that time. So again, a little bit of luck, a little bit of timing. Somehow, I ended up with 3 buildings on Main Street when I only really wanted like 1 sliver of it. And in 3 years, we've been able to transform Main Street, especially that northwest corner, into home to probably over 20 businesses right now. And the good news is that we're still kind of growing. Let's see. This is the latest project that I'm working on. So again, talking about food courts and markets. If you go across the country, this is kind of like the new, I wouldn't say hot thing, but a lot of people are appreciating the market more, and especially if it's like locally sourced food or, you know, niche businesses that aren't like your like the same old franchise stuff that you keep getting offered every day. I think there's interest in these kind of real estate constructs. I guess what best summarizes cake development? I think I use the fundamentals of real estate development to invest in the creation of entrepreneurial infrastructure. And hopefully some of the projects that I describe now will kind of give an idea of what that means. So going back to that first experience of buying my first apartment, and second, third, fourth, I think that's kind of the same with companies. It's like once you start one company, you're kind of dangerous enough to start another one. And the second company that I started was this co-working space called CoLab. And for those who aren't really familiar with co-working, you see these spaces popping up all over the country. WeWork is a big name in the co-working space. I think they're soon to IPO and become publicly traded. But you know, especially with the shift in how people work, doing like a creative economy, a freelance economy, sharing economy, combined with technology, it makes it much easier to get work done. And I think that's why you're seeing spaces like co-working, incubators, accelerators pop up all over the place. But basically, CoLab, it's just home to maybe right now 10 freelancers, or I guess creative businesses. It's people that usually would work from home or from a coffee shop, but I think co-working is, especially in Champaign-Urbana, it's serving this need where you don't want to work at home or the coffee shop anymore, and your business is starting to grow and scale, so you want this office without, I guess, committing yourself to like traditional commercial office space. And really, I think the best way I describe it is that it works like a gym membership. You pay a monthly fee, everything's included. There's no commitments, and it's much more flexible than traditional leased office space. And I think reiterating co-working in Champaign-Urbana, I think the difference is it's not just the space, because there's plenty of space in this county, and it's cheap also. But I think the value of co-working is that you're plugging in with this network of people who are starting just like you, or may not be in the same industry but are doing kind of the same things of struggling with their business. Or in some cases, and this has happened, is where we'll get a big contract and we'll try to distribute it out to other co-workers in the space. That doesn't happen as much anymore, but it has happened. And the other thing that we do too is being on Main Street, and especially being a storefront space, we didn't want to have an office that closed at 5 p.m. So on weekends, we try to encourage some of our friends to do pop-ups. We haven't done, I think there's a pop-up coming up maybe in March. But basically we encourage people like Neutral Cycle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their local bike shop, but what would a bike shop look like for a month in the space? And it's kind of this interesting display of their their product. Same thing is Pandemonium Donuts. I think it was like maybe like a year and a half ago. They started opening in like March when it was freezing cold outside, and I think it was the first time we've ever seen people line up on Sunday at 6 in the morning for donuts ever in downtown Urbana. And the line just went around and touched Courier's, and that was kind of an interesting meeting point because Courier is a space that everybody will like sit outside and wait for their table. Whereas here we have a line coming out of Main Street. I think that was surprising to everyone. But anyways, just by starting CoLab, observing how, and maybe just understanding what people just need to start at a basic level. You know, I've learned how to execute ideas maybe more efficiently. And I think that's the thing, is with ideas, it always remains an idea until you start putting the things together to it. And being a good executor is just something of why I continue to do what I'm doing. It's just like I want to become a better executor at ideas. If it's not good, then let's just table it. But if something's worth pursuing, let's go for it. Another business I started just recently actually is called Sipyard. And basically 2 partners and I opened a beer garden late in October. So we about had like a month and a half to run it before closing for the season. And yeah, because we are outdoors, I think the biggest question that we always get is what happens when it rains or what happens when it's too cold? And we kind of give them the common sense answer is just like, yeah, if it's raining and people don't want to come out, then we probably don't want to come out and open our business either. So we'll be closed. I guess, yeah, so the other, I think, other response is, you know, why work 12 months out of the year when you can work 8? I think we've said that a couple times, but yeah, I think the good thing is, you know, who wouldn't want a business that you can operate for 8 months of the year and then take 4 months off if you can do it? The problem is, okay, we only have 8 months to actually operate the business in, which is still an issue that we have to get over. And because of that, we've become like obsessive about metrics. And I don't know if anyone here is looking to do any kind of retail-based business, but the Square Register is an amazing tool for small businesses. Like before, I don't think there was anything out there, but if you're selling product, use Square because the amount of information that it can give you is incredible. And I think part of that is that if you know how to use spreadsheets or Excel or any other tool that does spreadsheet type stuff, you can be really dangerous with metrics. I think I remember like someone telling me that they were trying to fight for like a 2% margin on something. And I was like, 2%, who cares about 2%? When you get into retail, you will care about 2% because it makes a big difference over the span of a year, or in our case, 8 months. And like I said, sometimes it's not enough. I think we have like 2 or 3 spreadsheets just that we've built within the last month just to tell us like how to operate our business, what kind of feedback can we get back once we start opening. I think our opening is St. Patrick's Day. So, you know, how do we set up like the infrastructure there so that we can continue to learn, tweak, adapt from what's happening? And I think if you have a business, you know, that's one big important key is to understand how to measure and assess what works in order to adapt quickly when things go south. And being able to do that is why I continue to start. It's like I want to be better at adapting. And I think one of the key words that people have been saying is pivot. Everybody was using pivot like 5 years ago, but I mean adapting I think is being like more responsive to your environment. I think the last business that I want to touch on is another joint venture that I started. It's called Adjacency. And that's the marketing firm. So we focus a lot on creative branding and identity, especially in this age where content is almost king. Like there's so much content out there. There's so many things that you know, within 7 seconds, if they can sell you a product or make some sort of impact, you know, those are the ways we're going to get marketed to in the future. It's kind of sad, but I think that's the reality of things, especially with the phones and like TVs and other things that now occupy our time. I don't know if anyone's a real tech geek here, but I think augmented reality is one of those things that we're probably going to start seeing more of, especially with Google Glass and how everything. There was a big pushback on Google Glass. I think it's probably going to make a comeback just because that is the tool that augmented reality will probably exist in. And with Adjacency, you know, we work with startups, we work with smaller businesses. This is a business that does, I think they track your movement. It's almost like the Fitbit, but better. but it started in the U of I, moved to Research Park, now has an office in Chicago, so this is one of our good clients. But the other thing is that we also work with organizations, which was surprising to me. You know, the city of Urbana has hired us for work, Urbana Business Association, and then even the Small Business Development Corporation over there on Neal Street. And the other thing is, like, you know, we exist in a digital age, but a lot of our work is not necessarily digital. You know, I think, you know, growing up in the 90s of saying, like, this dot-com boom will basically erase a whole brick and mortar, you know, like everybody, you know, like Barnes & Noble probably hurt from that. But I think, you know, there is a balance between physical and digital. And I think, you know, digital exists only because they want to bring people to physical locations. So things like Yelp, Foursquare, all these things, I think you need both. And so that's why, for a creative firm, we want to exist in both worlds and be able to leverage, I guess, both environments. And I think that's kind of what the name means, is like there's adjacent relationships between physical things and digital things that, you know, if you can master that or get good at, you know, what those connections are for different businesses, because everyone has a different story. I think that's where seeking out those relationships are really key, or our competitive advantage. But the one thing that I picked out of adjacency is that, you know, a lot of our clients, we treat them like partners. And I think, you know, when you do that, you need to understand, you know, how to invest in their strengths, what their weaknesses are, and how to improve those. And having a partner mindset, I think it allows you to collaborate much more effectively. Instead of just treating people as a client, then you invoice, and then they build, you know. And this is probably like the newest skill that I want to keep working on. And it's really hard to partner. We talk about team building, we talk about doing all these things, but when you have many minds at the table, it can get difficult. And being able to be a good facilitator or collaborator in that, I think, is an important reason why I keep starting other businesses. I don't have many closing thoughts, but I think, you know, just reiterating, like, if you're not even thinking about starting, or you think like ideas that I have suck, or I have no money to start anything, I think it's just, you know, just be patient and be kind of diligent. I don't think anyone's going to hand you a good idea. I don't think any idea was really handed to me. And just get better at idea formation. Kind of those conversations you have during lunch or with your friends, and you're just frustrated, and you're like, I wish there was this or this. And I think going back those 10 years, if I could, I guess, summarize a lot of that, I think I really made an effort to build like a density and diversity of experiences that, you know, most of the times I did it at a very low cost or even for free. But, you know, those are things that I look back on now, and I'm like, I remember that time back then. And I think for those of you that are just starting, kind of like me, I think the one thing that I've learned, it is a lifestyle. It will require a lot of work. And I think just observing people that start in CoLab want to see success really quickly, right, within 3 months or less than a year. And I think if you want to build a good business, it takes time, and you just got to be patient also. I think there's this one saying about working 80 to avoid 40. You know, it's kind of cliche, but I mean, those are the kind of things, like you will actually work harder as a startup or as an entrepreneur than you will just taking a 9-to-5 job. And I think for those who have maybe tried something and it didn't pan out the way you wanted, I don't think there's anything to be ashamed about. I wouldn't worry too much. I think going through the basic steps of starting, you know, like I said, you build this foundation of starting, and so starting the next one is a little bit easier, and starting the next one after that is a little bit easier. And I can honestly say Cake Development is not the first company I started. It's probably like the 8th or 9th, because I had a lot of bad ideas before then. And I think I was at one talk, and one guy said, you know, failure is not lethal, and I believe that as something where you just keep trying, you pick yourself up, and hopefully you don't lose too much money in the process, but you know, I think, you know, just keep going. So with that, I mean, hopefully anything was valuable.
We've got about 5 minutes or so. Why don't we open it up for any questions? I have a couple, but if anybody wanted to start out?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for taking your time and share your story with us. My question is to the CoLab. Is it just local, or do you extend the service to other places?
Like physically, we're only in downtown Urbana. But co-working, there's different brands of co-working that you can find, and I think, you know, in Chicago, there's probably like 8 or 10 different co-working products available. Do we get a lot of local businesses? I would say, yeah, a lot of them are freelancers. A lot of people have graduated and maybe have started like an illustration business or a video business. I guess not to say that everything is local, because, you know, Uber is also a coworker there, and so they're a global company. But yeah, I think there's different reasons why you use co-working. And in a way, it's like if you can start and build some success there very cheaply and efficiently, maybe the next step is to go into the traditional lease market and get an actual office. And I think that's kind of how you see businesses grow, or just stay in the co-working space.
Okay, besides the space that you provide, you also provide services?
I think with co-working, most, I guess the level of services depends. For CoLab, we don't do anything like programmatic, like, hey, here's a business plan lunch, or here's a social media, I don't know, whatever, happy hour. When you get to places like incubators or accelerators, you'll see a lot more of that programmatic type, I'm going to call it formulaic type programming, because it's like, write a business plan, and once you write a business plan, what do you do next? You find financing, or you hash out your idea, and it's kind of like bringing people step by step, which I think is important, but I don't think that's the only way that you can start. I think, you know, there's this thing that I always like, is just like the grittiest people are the ones that usually get the stuff done, and if everything's always served to you in some sort of program, I think that kind of cheats the system a little bit, but I mean, it depends on what your business is also. The Research Park has an incubator, which I think it does really well with student startup businesses and a lot of the research that is coming out of the university. They throw a lot of resources to those companies, and I think that incubator system actually works really well. But yeah, I think, you know, CoLab, it's basically come and go for it. Yeah. Yep.
Did you find getting your financing or your capital one of the most difficult things?
I would say yes. I think doing for the Main Street stuff, I got probably denied by 8 banks before I finally found one bank willing to invest in the project. And I think it goes back to, you know, how many houses or apartments am I going to look at today, or how many banks am I going to talk to find the best rate? And it's again, just like going through that process of like, this is the amount of work that it takes to even get a project like this done. Is, you know, you build some tolerance for that, and you're like, got denied again, who cares, let's go find another bank to work with.
Say that you work with your clients as partners. Was there any situation or case where you felt like there wasn't going to be a good work connection between you two, where it didn't work out and you denied their service, or they denied working with you?
I guess they're kind of reform the question is like, so if we got, say, like a website project, or one company within CoLab did, and he decided, you know, like I can do maybe probably the illustration or the graphics part of it, but I need help with like the technical part of it, that kind of situation, or something else?
Situation.
Okay, I guess in that situation, we haven't had any problems like that. Actually, when work comes in, everybody's very competitive and enthusiastic about getting it. Whereas I think, I don't know, you know, CoLab necessarily working with other organizations, if there's been any kind of headbutting. I don't think it is. I mean, we choose, or I guess I choose what to sponsor when I'm putting the CoLab brand on things. So like things like Pachaka Cha or Kudo, those are things that fit within the framework of CoLab. So those are things that I like participating in. You know, COZAD is basically a startup competition with the University of Illinois. A lot of engineering students there. We're a sponsor for that. So I mean, it's like it depends on you know, some of the relations that I have with people that run those kind of things, and then whether or not, you know, there's a good opportunity there to use it for branding or to get CoLab's name out. I was going to say something else, but forgot.
Anybody
Anybody else?
Yeah, just a couple, Matt. You seem as a risk taker and part of the, I think, a formula for a successful entrepreneur, one who seeks an opportunity that can make that marketable, but you also have to assume calculated risk.
Yeah.
So you're a younger person, at least for me, and how do you handle risk?
I think I describe mine as it more as like risk tolerance.
Okay.
I mean, it's almost like drinking. Like if you're going to drink the first time, your tolerance is very low. And I think that's the same thing with risk. Is that, you know, the more risk you take, and if you're not taking like gambling type risks, but the more like smaller risks that you take, I think you start building this tolerance of being really good at assessing, I don't know, an idea, a problem. You know, just the beer garden itself, I think, was one of those things. We've never been in the beer business. I've only been in the food industry, really. But how different was it from that? And I think that was the tolerance that we had, is that, you know, not anybody can start it, but like I think we have enough to be dangerous to start something. So, I mean, I think that's maybe what was the 10-year period of being in DC. You know, just if I'm going to buy a house, then I'm going to buy a conservative. I'm not going to buy like a $300,000 house. I'll buy a $100,000 apartment, and make sure that cash flows and understand what the maybe the things that I weren't able to predict. I think just doing that process continually on anything is a good skill to build.
Okay. And then I also had something about time management. You've got a lot of irons in the fire, per se. Do you schedule your day that you're going to concentrate on one particular company, or is every day just however things happen?
It's a little bit of both. I try to schedule as much as I can. And sometimes it's you got to put on the firefighting hat and address something that's just come up.
Okay.
And I think that's the other thing too. I should have did a slide on that, but you know, building that tolerance is. I get frustrated a lot, and so when the router doesn't work, I get extremely impatient. Things should just work, right? But that's another tolerance that I think I've been building, is just being a good fighter, but then also being able to, you know, if I commit to starting something, then I allocate the time that's necessary for it.
Good. Very good. Well, some students have to get to class. Anything else? Very good. Thank you very much.